So I do identify as a member of the queer community. I've always been a nonconformist in other ways. I knew that fitting into this type of environment was never going to be easy. A small part of me knew that it wanted more, wanted different. And rather than, have the opportunity to learn and explore who you are as an individual, all you're really learning is who you need to pretend to be in order to survive the environment you're within. And then he started to ask certain questions and take the sessions into a direction which didn't feel comfortable. They felt quite intrusive from a sexual perspective. And I remember thinking, this doesn't feel quite right. It's a highly abusive practice to take somebody away from everything they've ever known, all their security, and just cast them out.
Hello and welcome to A Bunch of Therapists with me, Michaela McCarthy.
And me, Dipti Solanki, bringing you stories and insights from inside the therapy room.
This week we have Bruno Nice, who is a therapist, but he was brought up in a cult.
Yeah, I loved how the conversation went laterally so we can understand what a high control environment actually means and looks like. So I think it was a fascinating conversation.
So Bruno, thanks for coming on A Bunch of Therapists, and I'm interested to hear your story about why you went into therapy before you become a therapist. What was your journey?
It's quite a long story. Where would you like me to begin?
At the beginning.
The beginning. Okay, so I was born into a high control religious group.
Yeah.
So most of my childhood was spent within that organisation. And as you can imagine, in a high level of control, there's quite a lot of restrictions in terms of what you can do, who you can spend time with, the decisions you can make as an individual. So by the time
can I just ask, so when you were in the group, would you only mix with people who belong to that group rather than outsiders?
Generally, yeah.
Okay.
So one of the key indicators of a high control group is how much association is permitted with people who are not in that group.
Okay.
And generally, there is quite a lot, as I'm sure you can imagine from cults and other experiences that you might have read or heard about, there is a lot of control around relationships. It's how power is kind of kept. And that's true of all sorts of religions or secular organisations in the world, and has always been true. You're probably familiar with how certain elements of control are always present.
Yeah, even in family groups.
Even in family groups, which can sometimes also feel a little bit culty.
Yeah. Codependency is one of them. People don't realise, that you're following the family law rather than your own rules that you set up for yourself or beliefs.
A lot of which is quite implicit and is passed down generationally, sometimes even non-verbally.
Yeah, because I was brought up, we were speaking about this earlier on. So my upbringing, it wasn't strict, but I come from, all my family are Irish, brought up a Catholic. I just thought, okay, Catholic. But it was never forced on me to sort of, whether you have to believe in God or anything. But it was actually, but I'd done everything, like the Holy Communion and,
So would you go to church every Sunday?
I would go probably more with my grandparents and my family. My mum wasn't a churchgoer from her own upbringing, really. She was not totally against it, but wasn't for it. Which I think gave me that kind of balance. Do I get involved or do I don't? I had a bit of a choice, but I think your experience would be different.
It was different. So my parents actually joined this organisation in their adult lives, so they weren't born into it.
Okay.
Their parents were religious, like many British people can be, but not strictly so.
Sure.
But I think I was maybe 2 years old.
Oh, so you wouldn't have known the difference.
Exactly, and that's, I think, an interesting way to look at it, because when your entire personality or your childhood development is formed from within a high control space, one of the challenges to that is not perhaps having the scope to explore and to develop a secure base in terms of making your own choices and your own mistakes and living with some of the consequences, because everything is quite so managed for you.
Can you help me understand, and Michaela hopefully too, what would that look like on a day-to-day basis? What did it feel like, just to get a real sense of how it was for you?
Sure. So in this particular organisation that I was part of, there were 3 times a week where you would be required to attend church or church-like services. There would also be other personal study areas that you might do as a family. So on a day-to-day basis, I would say there was less time to play.
Right.
There was also, I think, a more of a focus on what you did when you could play. So there were some aspects of control, as I said earlier, about who you could spend time with or how much time you might spend with them. My parents did allow me to play with friends in the neighbourhood. You know, it wasn't a tight regime. I wasn't imprisoned. But there were certain rules, said or unsaid, about what could or couldn't be done. So as a child, I was such as, I mean, some of them are probably quite standard in terms of what children are advised to do and not do. But one thing that I always remember is being a bit of a geek. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons. And of course, Dungeons and Dragons were both considered to be quite demonic. So there was like this no-go area for me.
And what about school? Did you go to a school that was not related to the...
No, I went to a standard school, but some people within the organisation are homeschooled for some or all of their education. I have two nephews and they've both been homeschooled for their secondary education. And again, that's, as I understand it from my sister and her husband, part of their way of protecting their children from the outside world as they see it.
Did you feel different in school?
Definitely. And I think that's something which I personally really struggled with because I felt different within the organisation. It didn't really quite match what I was sensing from within me, but I didn't really feel like I fitted in with the world outside because there is constant communication about the world outside being dangerous, risky. It doesn't feel safe as a kid, I think, to go into an outside world where you're constantly told that there's threats. So I kind of felt like I didn't really fit in anywhere.
Well, I mean, imagine you would have got a sense of belonging. That was your community. But then going to school, you would have probably seen some difference, how people did things differently from maybe your family system.
Yes, I think you're right. I have always had an interest in difference, and I do believe it comes from growing up in an environment where there wasn't a lot of difference. There was a lot of conformity, a lot of rigidity, a lot of, you know, the way people had to behave and the clothes they had to wear and the things they could talk about and the things they did together was so similar.
How did you have to behave?
So I would say that's quite a big question. In terms of behaviour, there were definitely activities which were and weren't controlled. In some organisations, drinking alcohol, for example, isn't allowed. In this one, it's okay, but that's the kind of level that might be experienced by people who are in high control groups, what they can eat, what they can drink, what activities they can do, how much time they can spend doing it, who they can do it with. In some groups, there might be gender segregation, as we know, age segregation. So all aspects can be present. But in my particular experience, it wasn't that extreme. As I say, it was more a sense that there was a contained atmosphere which we all had to keep ourselves in for our own safety.
You mentioned earlier that you could sense within you that, I think you said that you felt different to what was being asked of you and how everyone else was behaving. Can you speak more about that?
Sure. And I still don't really know where it came from, but I just remember as a small child, I would be looking at some of the images or the pictures or hearing the stories that we were told and just thinking, that seems a bit odd.
So questioning it,
but also not being able to verbally question it. And again, that's
healthy to question.
It's vital. It's vital being able to question.
And kids do question a lot. They'll say, why is this? Why is that? Why?
Yeah.
Because they're curious. The world's so new for them.
And a question which I used to ask as a kid, and I still jokingly ask to my dad sometimes, is, but dinosaurs? You know, and I often get a similar answer. But it's those sorts of things which didn't quite make sense.
So, Bruno, because of your experience, you know, growing up in a controlled environment, let's say, and then trying to find kind of knowing yourself, having intuition to kind of think, I need to do life differently here. Did you find you were hiding yourself at times or living a secret with your family? And how did you manage that, you know?
Definitely. I think most most high control groups will have so many rules that inevitably the self either becomes flattened, repressed, oppressed. That can sometimes become internalized, where the individual will sort of punish themselves. So you're left questioning a lot of things yourself. And rather than, have the opportunity to learn and explore who you are as an individual, all you're really learning is who you need to pretend to be in order to survive the environment you're within. So, that might involve elements of sexuality, of course. There's other aspects, I think, in terms of, I loved electronic music. So I was born in 1980, grew up in the house era. By the early 90s, I was doing my GCSE revision to a lot of electronic music. And so the club scene, the rave scene was a huge draw for me. And that, again, is not part of what's allowed within the high control group. So having to sort of hide the bit of me that's going out dancing, it was definitely a part of my teenage years.
So how long were you in this high controlled environment?
I'm going to say cult then.
Yes.
You can call it what you
like.
Dipti. Yeah, I don't mind.
Yeah.
Maybe it's important to look a little bit at the phrases.
Let's talk about the terminology for a moment.
What does it mean, sort of a cult versus a high control? Does it mean the same? What is that?
Yeah.
You probably know more.
That is a really important question, and it's a question that's still being explored through research. But the language has changed a lot, especially over the last 20 years. And you're probably going to come across terms like cult, but also high control group, captive organisation. And these are slightly more umbrella terms. For example, if I say cult, what comes up for you?
Well, this is, exactly. I was just thinking that as you were talking, when we think of cults, you think of, people who are shut off from the outside world completely, being made to do things they don't want to do, practices, rituals.
Due to kind of the misunderstanding of what the word means.
Yeah.
Can also contribute to people's own struggle when they're questioning, am I in a cult? They might feel, as you said, some elements of conformity or rigidity, but, there's no one sacrificing animals on an altar, it's not a cult.
Yeah.
But there are several questions which I would suggest whenever I see clients to ask themselves about their environment and their experience, to really explore, is what they're going through cult-like, or does it contain elements of spiritual abuse, religious trauma, or in terms of more secular organisations where there isn't any religious elements, coercive control, which is obviously quite a classic experience of many people, even in one-on-one in relationships. When we think of domestic abuse, there's elements of coercive control. And there are a lot of similarities between the way that one human being can manipulate or try to control another.
Bruno, I'm really struck by that term spiritual abuse. And I'd love for you to talk about that a bit more if you're comfortable doing so.
Sure. So I would say firstly that my personal experience didn't feel spiritually abusive, but that's possibly because I had this part of me that was just questioning it, like, what is this? Yeah. There are people, colleagues and friends of mine who have experienced spiritual abuse within the same organisation. And it can vary a lot, but obviously it's more likely to happen within a high control group that is religious. But it would be things like what we call spiritual bypassing, which is to ignore perhaps a feeling or an emotion and just say, you just need to have more faith, or you just need to pray harder, or you just need to serve God more, and then you'll feel better. So it's this kind of leapfrogging, if you like, of a really valid part of the human experience. There may also be more extreme forms of spiritual abuse by suggesting that you might be possessed, that you might, by a witch or a demon or a devil, and physically abusing an individual because of that belief. So it ranges a lot, but those are some examples of what spiritual abuse might look like.
Yeah.
So how do you get out of that, when you decide not to be there?
It's a long process. And how you get out of it depends a little bit on the elements of coercive control or spiritual abuse or control that you have experienced. And it can also be quite complicated. If you've had your choices taken away from you, and I'm talking about extreme cases now where, when you sleep, what you eat, if you can work or not, when that's taken away from you, being put back in a situation where you're suddenly able to make choices on a daily basis can be highly stressful.
Overwhelming.
Completely. And it can produce anxiety, it can produce confusion, it can produce anger. And in some cases, there's a real strong desire to return to the previous environment.
Well, because it gave you a sense of belonging.
Exactly.
And it was familiar. So what was that journey like for you?
It was difficult. I think I navigated it as well as I could have done. But part of that navigation did involve an experience of therapy, which also contributed to the reason I'm a therapist today.
Do you mind saying more about that?
Of course. So I was probably about 17 or 18. I can't remember the exact age because it's a bit fuzzy. It was quite a difficult time. But I was at the age where, you know, you want to do the things everybody wants to do when you're 17 or 18. You want to have the kind of fun. You want to have the sort of relationships with people, the sorts of intimacy you might be wanting to have. And of course, most of that was not allowed within the organisation. So living with my parents was basically this choice of, well, you can stay here or you can leave and do all that stuff, which we don't recommend. And, you know, just as a reminder, it's dangerous. So it was almost out of necessity that I had to leave that environment. And I do feel I was lucky in a way because I had started a relationship with an individual who was incredibly confident. They had their own trauma. They'd grown up in a country and experienced war from an early age. So all throughout their childhood and their teenage years, they'd experienced war firsthand. So they brought their own trauma into the relationship. But because of that, they were so sure of themselves and they'd experienced so much trauma that day-to-day choices and making decisions was so easy for them. So for me, it gave me a real grounding. Ultimately, the relationship didn't last, but for a few years, I was kind of protected by their confidence and their ability to make choices and decisions. So when the relationship did come to an end, I was ultimately better equipped to start knowing what I wanted.
So Bruno, tell me, you mentioned that you'd had some therapy earlier on in life. How did that, where, who and how?
So, I mean, I have had therapy at several stages throughout my life, but I would say my first therapy experience was quite an important one. It wasn't a helpful one and it wasn't a pleasant one, but that also contributed to what I'm doing today. So essentially, when I was struggling the most with what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be and who I wanted to do it with, and I had to make the choice to leave home, there came from my parents, bless them, the are you sure? Are you sure? I mean, it's dangerous and it's scary and it's all going to go wrong, right? You know that, you know it's all going to go wrong. So a lot of doubt again, you know, sowing seeds of doubts as to my choices. And they asked me if I wanted therapy. And I had no experience of therapy, but I liked the thought of it. So I accepted, sure. They found a therapist who was also part of the high control group. And at the time, I think half of me was like, maybe not the best choice, but wanted to please my parents and meet them halfway and, you know, compromise essentially. So I agreed. And I saw this chap for probably only about 4 sessions. Even though I had no experience of therapy, something within me told me that this wasn't what it should be like.
That's the intuition.
Yeah, the intuition, or it wasn't what I needed. So this particular therapist, there was definitely no empathy. He wasn't really listening. He was telling me what he thought was wrong and telling me how we were going to fix it. It didn't really feel like the sort of space that I needed or wanted. And then he started to ask certain questions and take the sessions into a direction which didn't feel comfortable. They felt quite intrusive from a sexual perspective.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, this doesn't feel quite right.
If you're enjoying a bunch of therapists, why not like, subscribe and share with a friend?
So after, as I said, 3 or 4 sessions, I decided to stop. I thought, this isn't helping. I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. I'm going to leave this therapeutic relationship.
It's great that you were able to do that, though.
It was.
Because a lot of people don't feel like they should stop because maybe it's something they're not getting or they're doing wrong.
Exactly. But somehow I just knew it wasn't great. And I still remember walking away from the last session, sitting on the bench at a tube station somewhere in East London and thinking, that was awful. That was not what I needed. Someday I would like to be able to provide a different sort of support for people like me. And I guess it was then that the first seed of becoming a therapist was sown. I did some years later find out that this particular therapist had been sexually abusing many young men on the therapy couch within the sessions. And, hearing that was quite validating in some ways that something was wrong, but also incredibly sad.
How, people even in this profession can actually be controlled and abuse their authority.
Such an abuse of power.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Did he talk about your sexuality? Was that brought up in the sessions as well?
So essentially you're leading to conversion therapy, right? When a therapist,
something like that,
when a therapist will try to alter or change the direction of a client's sexuality through the therapeutic process, there were definitely elements of that. As I say, I only had 3 or 4 sessions, so it didn't get to the point where that process begun. But the way that he was describing what we were going to be doing in the future, with what I know now about how conversion therapy works, would tick that box. Also, it felt like some of the questions and the way he was taking the therapy were for his own pleasure, satisfaction, power. So not even from a conversion therapy perspective, but just from an abuse of power within the therapeutic relationship.
How did you feel then when you did finally find a therapist where you could actually talk about yourself? Or did that take some time to build up trust?
So firstly, I always accepted myself. I never really had a problem with who I was. I just knew it was going to be a bit of a difficult thing to navigate if I wanted to stay within that particular group. But definitely finding a therapeutic space where you can actually say what's on your mind, say what you're feeling, say what you're thinking, and it's not judged, it's empathized with, it's reflected, it's summarized, all the crucial elements of therapy really makes a difference. It kind of it reinforces the elements of yourself which are struggling to manifest in a stronger way.
But if you think about the development of anybody, to make decisions, whether you want, I don't know, tea or coffee, it's anything, it should be free and come naturally. But for you, coming out of the environment that you were in, it was difficult.
Yeah.
And knew that people did this.
Yes. And I think it's a really important experience to highlight as one of the ways which high control groups can exert power. So whether it's religious or secular, if there's a threat of what we call shunning in religious terms or expulsion in secular terms, if there's a threat of removing you entirely from the organisation so you have no contact, that is one of the warning signs for me of a high control environment, if it's not easy to leave. And again, in extreme cases, people who've left certain religious organisations or secular organisations, they're not allowed contact with their friends, they're not allowed contact with their family, sometimes they don't have a home, sometimes they lose their job. So essentially, these people are highly vulnerable when they've gone through that experience. So navigating the basics of life, let alone working out who they are as individual people.
How was it for you then when you started to share yourself with others? Did it feel kind of a bit odd or new, or did you hold yourself back?
It didn't feel odd or new, but it felt like, and this is something I take to personal therapy as well, like it feels like there's layers which kind of get separate. So it didn't feel like an integrated version of myself, especially in those early years, and in some ways still today. We're all a work in progress, but it felt like I'd almost turned a page, and this was the next chapter, and the previous chapter was just sort of left there, So it felt like a new start, a fresh start, which is great in many ways, like a blank canvas. But at some point, we all, I think, believe as therapists, there does need to be an integration process where we're kind of able to be all of who we are. And as I say, that's in some ways still a work in progress. I'm still discovering aspects of myself that are new to me.
So, you were brought up in an environment that was quite controlled, let's say a religion, a cult, whatever you want to call it. But when you left, and obviously you found more of yourself and maybe enjoyed elements of your life that you hadn't before, but was there sometimes that you sat with yourself and that there was a bit of a loss of what you had?
I think there's probably a loss of a childhood that could have been, you know, and I'm sure many of us do wrestle with that, especially in therapy, that needs that were met, the needs that were unmet, and definitely the needs that were unmet I struggle with. I lost some friends, obviously, when I left. Yeah, and they were great friends, and I really hope they're fine now and they're okay, but for obvious reasons I can't reach out to them because it's just not possible to maintain those sorts of relationships due to the way the organisation works. And in terms of loss and how we understand loss, whatever model we look at, there's often layers and there's stages and there's phases, one of which is anger. So I think I went through an angry phase as well before I went through a loss phase. But most of my 20s was just a fun phase.
What was the anger about?
I think the anger was, at the time, struggling with the fact that I was made to feel like the bad one for making choices which felt right to me, that I wasn't given the sort of the respect, I suppose, or the individual power to make a choice that's different to other people's choices and for that to be accepted.
And have you kind of worked with people or know people that they've moved one organisation and then they find another one?
Yes, and that can often happen. I think the need to have some kind of security is essential. And whilst I'm not an existentialist therapist, I think the four givens of existential therapy are so true when it comes to life, right? The fear of death, the fear of meaninglessness, the fear of loneliness. You know, these fears, they're taken away by a religion or a group or a community. So losing those or losing access to that can really bring these fears to the surface.
Yeah, this gives rise to so many thoughts in my head because, I don't think it's that obvious in most cases that people think they're being controlled anyway. And it happens in so many families, it happens in so many workplaces, it happens in so many friendship groups. And I think the common thread there is the fear of what happens if I leave, you know. So was that fear present for you?
Definitely.
Okay, talk to us more about that.
Yeah. So I would say I had that fear probably from around the age of 10 or 11. So I do identify as a member of the queer community. I've always been a nonconformist in other ways. I knew that fitting into this type of environment was never going to be easy. But I also had this belief that if I left it, I'd really struggle. I thought I'd get eaten alive.
That was the belief.
Yeah.
It's a bit like when families, whatever their, culture, some cultures are stronger. And if you leave that culture or the family system, they don't speak to you again.
Yeah.
So you leave not just the family, but the whole community, the whole framework that's been, and you're on your own.
Exactly.
Completely. But what I'm really interested in is when that fear is present, and for you it was, you were already aware of things about 11, 12 years old. What is it that allows you to move through that fear and finally leave?
I wish I could answer that directly, partly because I don't quite remember. It was a difficult few years and I somehow just coped and got through it. And partly because, as I said earlier, I do think it was almost about necessity. It was either you're in or you're out. I had to sort of just dive in at the deep end. Did it get to that point? Yeah, with my parents saying, you kind of, if you want to live with us, you have to continue following our rules, and if you want to do something else, you need to leave. So it's hard to say exactly, but what I like to believe, and this is part of my work as a person-centered therapist, is that there was this process of self-actualization, that a small part of me knew that it wanted more, wanted different, or might be happy. It wanted to believe that something could shift in the right direction. And I just feel like that small part of me somehow propelled me forwards.
And did you ever leave and go back?
No.
When you left, you left?
I left.
So I imagine some people leave, go back, leave, go back.
Yeah, and I've had friends who've had similar journeys to mine, but I've also had friends who've really suffered. Friends who've left and literally moved halfway across the world and joined another strange organisation or a high control group. I've had friends who've had severe mental health issues. I
can imagine,
And going back to your point about leaving the environment, it's a highly abusive practice to take somebody away from everything they've ever known, all their security, and just cast them out. Not only is it abusive, but also reinforces the belief that people who leave struggle. So anyone who's in the organisation looks at people who try to leave and go, oh, well, look, they really struggle. They're having a really hard time. Better stay here where it's safe.
Case in point, yeah.
So it's a brilliant way to control
So when
people.
you left, so to speak, and you went on a journey,
Yes.
Did you know it was right for you?
Yes. No, I never regretted it. I never felt wrong for doing it. Some of the beliefs and the ideas that the organisation had around, the world ending or catastrophe coming or whatever did linger. The bigger part of me didn't believe them, but a small part of me wondered, could they be true? Or, is this happening? And when you see the state of the world today, you think, oh goodness, is this Bible prophecy? Is this all coming to an end? But the bigger part of me said, well, even if it is, I'm still happy where I am now. And I'm pleased that I've left. So no, I never regretted the decision, even when it was tough.
And what about now that, because you've had that experience and then you work with other people that do come from controlled religious or cults or whatever you want to call it.
And anybody out there who is looking at therapy as an option to help them work out if they're in a high control group or a cult or not, it is important to find a therapist who has some understanding either of cults or high control groups or of religious, trauma, spiritual abuse, as we looked at earlier. But I would say the biggest challenge is working out how to label your experience. So going back to what you said about what makes it a cult, what makes it a high control group, it's really important that individuals come to that decision themselves. And I have worked with clients where, from my perspective, it's really culty, but from their perspective, they've given it a different name. And whether that's to protect the relationship they have with people who are still in the group, whether it feels right for them, what's important to me is that someone who's grown up in that environment is able to decide for themselves and feel from their heart, from their gut, from their soul, that they're able to label their experience that in a way that's true to them.
So just out of interest, when you say it that way, say someone has left and it could be ages ago, being in a high controlled environment, will it affect your relationships, whether it be romantic, friendships, work, because of your experience? Because you be in another system. Yeah,
definitely. So when you think about, again, the ability to make choices for yourself or to even have that sense of self, if that has been restricted or limited or managed or diminished, it's definitely going to affect the way you relate with people, especially when you think about attachment theory and what that means for us.
So how did you work through your journey a bit when coming from that environment and learning how to make decisions and have choices, and did it affect your friendships or relationships?
Again, I feel I was lucky. I made quite a lot of friends quite quickly.
Yeah.
I got a stable job and I got on really well with my colleagues. So I developed a social network relatively fast. And I think that saved me.
Yeah.
I was almost 19 or 20 by that point. So you can imagine, a 20-year-old boy in London, first time, going to have a lot of fun, going to have a lot of experiences.
And so how do they find you, these people? Do you advertise yourself as working with?
I do talk on my website. I do talk about the fact that I work with high control groups.
Yeah.
Generally, when people are looking for support, they don't know where to look in the first place, which is another example of high control. Maybe access to internet is restricted. Maybe access to educating the self is restricted. There are organisations out there to support people.
Yeah.
I do some supervision work for an organisation called Faith to Faithless, which is part of Humanists UK. And they provide many support resources. It's a good starting point for anybody who is looking for help.
So we were talking just before, because we were talking about your coming on, the podcast, and I was talking about religion, and I asked, what about your faith? And you're open to pretty much everything. I'm
a Hindu, and we were talking specifically about whether my religion accepts people being gay, but 100%, because the soul is seen as genderless. And so however that chooses to represent itself on earth is completely fine. But also, I think growing up, my dad always allowed us to he always encouraged us not to fall too much into the rituals and the do's and the don'ts. And he said, feel into the faith and feel into the energy of it and how it sustains you, rather than how also you need to sustain it and the rituals and the dogma of it as well. So you can skirt on the outside of most things, but also to have a faith that you can lean into.
So how do you feel about God now?
Good question. I would say I'm agnostic, but to Dipti's point, I do think it's worth affirming that I completely believe that faith and groups and religions and spirituality can be highly helpful and highly supportive for many people. And just because some people have a negative experience within some high control religious groups doesn't mean that, all religions are high control or all secular groups are high control. There are aspects of control in many organisations and groups, and that's part of keeping people safe, but it's the extent to which that's exerted, and if it becomes abusive, that's when we need to start questioning it. And the questions would be certain things like, how much am I being controlled? Am I told what to wear? Am I told what to do? Am I told when to do it? Am I told who to do it with? Am I told who to not do it with? Is language being used to manage or control me in some ways? Are activities being managed? How are people outside of my group viewed? How are they treated? How is my relationship with them also managed? Is there any form of exploitation, either of my skills, of my time, of my money, or in worst cases, of my sexuality, which does happen in some cults? Doubt is a really important one for me. So I think doubt gets a bit of a bad press, but doubt is vital. So am I able to question the authority figures within my organisation?
That's so important, that one. Just on something you said earlier, what does life feel like when you're not being controlled? But are any of us free of an element of control anyway?
Very good point, Dipti.
Well, we might control ourselves. We don't need anyone.
Hope so, but
yeah, but in a positive way.
Some of us more than others.
Yeah, but I think that we all have so many influences in our life that if we're not paying attention, we are being controlled by. And that really affects our mental health and the way that we show up in the world, know.
And going back to the 4 givens of existential therapy, one of the fears is the freedom to make our own rules, to make our own decisions, to make our own choices.
Well, I think that's a really great note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've really loved our conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to A Bunch of Therapists with me, Michaela McCarthy, and Dipti Solanki.
And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to review, like and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts. And do follow us on our socials. Until next time, see you soon.